Welcome friends to another homebrew Middle-earth game. And homebrew it is because I do use a wide variety of sources of information, interpretations, and some of the lore written in Tolkien's work to produce, some homemade battles essentially using the miniature war game rules presented in the Games Workshop game first published in 2001. Now these are older rules, and I decided to use these because, the books are in my collection, and this was a very, very fun game in the past. So a little bit of nostalgic feeling, perhaps, is what motivated this series. Basically, sometime after the beheading of the great orc Azog and the scattering of his Moria Legion, which we're calling Azog's Legion, the army that was once Azog's Legion is now tattered and broken. Some of these orcs have formed small war bands, like the one we're going to see today, and they are all now nicknamed the Tattered Legion by the small dwarven settlements that are sort of peppering the Misty Mountains. Again, this is a made-up scenario. So we're saying that when at some point in time, some dwarves left Moria to establish smaller settlements here and there, and some small settlements were established when Durin actually left Gundabad way back in the day. Now all of this takes place in the Third Age, of course, but here is my proposed battle. And here is the Dwarf Force, which is a mixture of dwarf warriors and Moria expeditionary forces. We have the Moria expeditionary infantry here, the guys with the blue sword, and they have a special ability called the Wealth of Moria, and friendly dwarf models with either the Khazad-dûm or Moria keyword may reroll 2 wound rolls of 1s whenever they're in close combat. Plus, they also get an extra a +1 to wound orcs because they are carrying Orcbane swords, those blue swords that we see them there. We have a dwarf captain, and he's just a regular dwarf captain. He is a hero, however, has 2 might, will of 1, and fate 1. And the rest of the dwarves are dwarf infantry. These are armed with both hand weapons and two-handed weapons. So we'll see how they work in battle. And then we have, in addition to the dwarf warriors, we have a Moria banner guard with dwarf banner in the back. So yeah, there we go. Okay, and the dwarf banner guard have double-handed weapons, and they are affected by the Wealth of Moria rule. Now the orcs are of a fairly mixed force. We have the orc captain in the center there, Farlog, with the 2 swords, 2 orc swords, and then a mutated wharg that is part of his retinue, and then the rest of his orcs. These are all Gundabad orcs with their heavy tusks and long elongated snouts. These are carrying heavy weapons, two-handed weapons, and they form Farlog's bodyguard, basically. Now here we also have a unit of Gundabad orcs, each with hand weapons and shields. And these are just regular Gundabad orc warriors. And in the back we have a unit of 3 orc hunters, and these were once part of Azog's Great Legion. So these were once Azog's orc hunters, now just part of the Tattered Legion. So 3 orcish hunters riding wargs with bows and swords. The goal for the orcs is to take control of this portion of the board, either the rocks underneath the ledge here or the ledge itself. The orcs have to get 3 models either on top of these rocks or on the ledge itself in order to win. They do have to climb this terrain in order to get up here, so that is very important. And for the dwarves have to hold the orcs off and prevent them from taking control of either the rock formation or the ledge, which is the entrance to the Grey Halls. Deployment is pretty straightforward for the dwarves. All the dwarves are here right at the entrance to the Grey Halls with the Moria banner man and his guard right on the ledge there, and then all the dwarves spread out amongst the rocks. Now, dwarves do have Pathfinder Mountain, which allows them to move through that difficult terrain without an issue. All right, now the orcs are spread out a little bit more. We have the orc hunters here with their wargs, and they are approaching this road. Then we have Farlog and his wharg, mutated wharg, along with his bodyguard, are moving up the road here. And then finally we have another small group of Gundabad warriors, and these guys are on rough terrain, so they're going to have a little bit of difficulty moving through there. They're going to be half moves to begin with, but not too bad. Here is the board, and we can take a look at how the board looks. The dwarves win priority in turn 1 with a roll of a 6. The turn then proceeds with the move phase. Both dwarves and orcs will complete their moves during this phase. Having priority, the dwarf captain moves first. In this house-ruled game, dwarves have the mountain pathfinder rule, so they are not hindered by the rocky outcropping that lines the entrance to the Grey Hall. Following the captain, more warriors begin to follow suit, thus forming a battle line against the incoming orcs. Then it's the orcs' turn. Well, the orcs then begin to press their attack, beginning with the wharg riders in the far right of the army. Movement then proceeds to the middle of the orc warband as Farlog's wharg rushes forward in anticipation of a fight. Farlog himself makes a 6-inch move, followed by all of his orcs in turn. On the orc left flank, shielded Gundabad warriors negotiate the difficult terrain slowly but surely. Now we're ready for the shooting phase. Okay, so the shooting phase, the dwarves have no shooting, so we go to the orcs now, since dwarves had priority, but they have no shooting. So now they fire. I will use 3 dice to represent the orcs. Now these are orc hunters, and so they hit on 4s. Okay, so 2 hits, 2 of them hit, and now they roll to wound, but they need 6s to wound the dwarves. These dwarves have shields and they have good armor, good dwarven armor, so 1 wound on a dwarf. So one of these arrows penetrates the dwarven armor, and we have 1 fallen dwarf already. All right, the closest one, that's what I will do. The shooting phase over, we move to the fight phase, but there is no fights going on, so we can skip that and now go to the end phase of the turn. There are no effects or anything to take care of, so we end turn 1 and go to turn 2, priority phase. Reroll priority. All right, so orcs are the black dice and dwarves are the white dice, and the orcs have priority this turn. It is turn 2, and Farlog's wharg immediately makes a move towards the closest dwarf, which happens to be the dwarf captain. He charges the captain ferociously. Farlog charges next, not far behind, However, he doesn't quite make it to the dwarven lines. Now in these games, instead of a table-controlled AI, I usually like to give the orcs or whatever AI faction I'm playing the best decision possible when I don't have AI tables. So that means that the orc archers kept their distance from the dwarven heavy infantry in order to continue firing their bows. Well, it didn't work all that great, but that's the idea. So now it is the dwarf's move. One of the dwarven warriors charges a wharg rider on the left flank of the dwarf line. This sets up combat for the fight phase. And now this is a view of some of the combats that are occurring in the middle of the battlefield. So now the banner man and his guard move down from the ledge. Gundabad archers are better quality than most other orcs and score hits on 4+. The wharg riders all fire their bows, but they fail to wound a single of the heavily armored dwarves. Well, it's time to resolve the fight phase now, and the side with priority acts first. So we're going to move to the dwarven warrior that attacked the mounted warg rider. The dwarf rolls, he wins the combat and digs his axe into the beast, mortally wounding it with a 6. So now let's see what happens next. Okay, so the first warg is slain. So we roll a d6 and that is a 6. Leaps into action the rider, bounds from the saddle of his plunging mount to confront the enemy. The model is replaced by a model on foot and suffers no further penalty. All right, pretty good. Okay, so the warg is slain. We're going to put the warg on its side, and then the rider leaps into action with a bladed bow, because these orcs have bladed bows, and so he's there ready to fight. It is the fight phase for turn 2, and our dwarven hero faces off with the warg. He uses 2 dice to attack, but only considers the highest number when determining who won the fight. The captain rolls an awesome roll, and the warg loses the fight, thus retreating. The captain's strength is 4, and the warg's defense is also a 4. Checking the wound table, the dwarf has a heavy weapon, so he rolls 2d6, still considering only the highest roll. He rolls to wound, and he slays the warg with another awesome roll, and he didn't even have to use any might points to adjust the roll. Looks like the dwarves are not doing so bad. Well, not so fast. The orc captain is engaged with a moria expeditionary, whom he slays with a single swing of his large blade. Another brave dwarf is down, and the orc captain takes revenge over his own warg. Priority phase. Black is orcs, and it looks like the dwarves take the priority. It is turn 3, and the dwarves have been doing very well, winning priority for the game. The bannerman and his guard move down effortlessly behind the weakening dwarven line. Banner guard rush to plug in holes left by fallen dwarves. Instead of blindly moving into combat, the dwarves choose to move only enough to solidify their lines and confront the incoming attacks. Looking at the battlefield, we see a slight crescent shape to the dwarven formation. Meanwhile, the orc hunters mobilize, also maintaining caution to stay in shooting range and not rush into melee range. The move phase continues with the orcs as Forlong charges the dwarf captain. Now both lines clash with each other. Finally, the left orc flank joins the fray, complicating things for the dwarves. The archers on the orc side are firing. They need 4s. Oh, one hit. Let's say it's this one against this one. So the dwarf with orc bane is pushed back. Let's see if he is wounded. The archer needs a 6. And he rolls a 1, and no, the arrow just hits the shield of the dwarf. He is pushed back, but he is fine. No wound. All right. That ends the shooting phase, and now we go into the fighting phase with orc and dwarf lines smashed in and together. Orcish axes smash on dwarven shields and vice versa. Both lines are now fully engaged. So we begin with a Moria expeditionary and his orc-bane sword. The orc wins the fight, and the dwarf has to retreat. But fortunately, the blow is deflected by the dwarven shield. In the next combat, a dwarf wins by rolling a 6, causing the orc itself to retreat. So the dwarf uses 2 dice because he has a heavy weapon. The orc is defense 5. He is a Gundabad orc, so strength defense of 5. He has no shield, also a heavy weapon, but he lost the fight. Dwarf has a fight of 4. So now the dwarf needs 5s according to the wound chart. And no, he does not do it back an inch, but he survives. Okay, so there's a slugfest going on there. All right, moving on to the next combat. Our 2 heroes clash in the center of the battlefield, with Ironbeard fiercely defending his space. Combat between heroes is a little different in this game. Both heroes roll 2 dice each, but only the highest rolls are considered. Ironfoot wins the fight, but Forlorg burns 1 might to raise his 5 result to a 6, thus matching his opponent. With even results, both models compare their fight stat. Well, they are also even, so a roll-off is required. 1, 2, or 3 evil side wins, 4, 5, 6 good side wins, and good side is the result. Chart is 5s. Oh, and he does no wounds to the orc. Oh, so he just pushes them back, and basically that's where they are squaring off. Okay, next combat. Okay, so the dwarf is defending a barrier, so all that does is that the zone of control extends past, an inch past, the dwarf's front base so that he can attack the enemy. So that's that, and then the barrier is about half the height of the dwarf. Okay, so there's the fight, the final fight for this turn. Dwarf is the white die as always, and okay, an even number, so let's roll and see who wins. 1, 2, or 3 is the evil side, 4, 5, 6 is the good side. It looks like the evil side wins, and he's pushed back. Defensive 6. What is the orc strength of 4? 4 on 6 means he needs 5s. Yep, he does wound the dwarf. The dwarf is cleaved, and the dwarves are losing momentum here. The dwarves can still win this game. We have 2 more turns. If they can hold out those 2 turns and stop orcs from reaching the ledge, the entrance to the Great Halls, they can win this game. That'll represent them actually blunting the orc attack. However, my concern is that the dwarf right flank has caved in now with the death of the last warrior. Maybe stretch their lines to cover that gap, or else the orcs on the facing the right flank of the dwarves are gonna push up and win the game by getting 3 models on the ledge. As before, the dwarves continue to win priority in this game. A moria expeditionary turns and rushes behind the banner to plug a hole in the right flank of the line. This dwarf could have charged a wharg in front of him, but reinforcing the line after the fall of a companion is priority. With this move, I continue to play off camera. Okay, let us summarize turn 4. Turn 4 is over. If we go to this flank, we see that both wargs have been taken down. This rider rolled on the table, and he ends up leaping off the mount before it died, and he is ready for battle with the dwarf. He is engaging the dwarf with his bladed bow. Now this rider disentangles himself from his dead mount and just stands up there. So in this flank, the dwarves are okay. Moving here, this dwarf, I left a 6. He rolled a 6 to wound, +1 because of Orcbane. That's the sword he's holding. And he demolishes that orc. That orc is gone and out of the line. These two, it's just a slugfest. They both failed their wound to inflict any wounds, although they hit. Even with their heavy weapons, they both failed. They rolled very low on the wound check, and both of them failed to wound each other. Now, this guy here was actually blocking this dwarf from being able to be pushed back. So what happens, there is a rule in the game that if a friendly model is blocking your guy, you can actually give a free 1-inch movement of that model to try and give space for the retreat. If you can't retreat, that model is considered trapped, which means it takes double hits. So you have to be kind of careful where models are positioned in this game. The leader, right here, he rolled, he is fighting with the dwarf captain. He inflicts 1 wound on the dwarf captain. I just left the 6 there to show the wound. He actually wounds the dwarf captain with a 6. But the dwarf captain is still fighting. And we have this dwarf here who's was running towards that gap there to support this flank, but then now these dwarves, during their movement phase, instead of attacking the dwarf, they're coming around and making their way towards the objective. So I think he's going to change his mind and rush this way and at least become a barrier. The orcs, this is already going to be the last turn. I don't think they're going to make it because they do have to roll climb rolls to get up here, and dwarves have their superior mountain pathfinder ability, which allows them to move normally through that rough terrain. So again, I don't think the orcs are going to make it, but this is a close call. I mean, this is definitely not a quick victory for the orcs. Both sides are pretty bloodied, as we see from the casualties here. And we're going to add another casualty to the orc side. So a very tough fight indeed. The first orc reaches the rocks with his 3 inches of movement. And now let's see the climb table, which I'm using from the game. Right here, the climb chart. Let's see. He rolls a 4. Continue to climb. If the top or bottom is reached, place the model at the edge. The model cannot move further that turn. But so he's going to stay there. And now for the next orc. The next orc has to climb. After this roll, I thought about giving the orcs a +1 in future games since they are mountain creatures. For now, we'll leave it like this though. The orc rolls a 3 result, and this gives the same result on the table as the first. Both orcs continue to climb but don't make it to the top. This position does not fulfill the scenario goal. The final orc, however, does make it to the top, but it's not enough to control the entrance space, as we needed 3 models. The dwarves have thus succeeded in protecting the entrance to the Great Halls. Despite the success of the dwarves, I continue the game with the orc move phase. Casualties are higher with the orcs. However, the 4 dwarf casualties cause a big impact on the dwarven line. The orc mounted hunters have been all but destroyed, with the exception of 1 archer on foot. Okay, so following the orc move, now the lines are again engaged. Everyone's engaged in combat except for these guys. Now the dwarves get to move. That was just the orc move. And this guy uses his superior pathfinder skills, mountain skills. He doesn't have to roll to climb. He just gets up because he is a mountain pathfinder. And basically all the dwarves in this region have that ability. So that puts them there and puts him there in front. And actually, let's see, I could... Yeah, I have to stay an inch. Alright, we're gonna put him there with the orc bane, and he hasn't charged the orc, so he has to keep something of a distance there. Okay, so it looks like the orc wins. So this guy is pushed back. 4 to 6 on the chart means here's the defense. So that means 5s. Ooh, close call on that dwarf. Close call. Okay, let's do resolve the other combat now. It's a second dwarf that is on that guy. Oh, even numbers. His fight is also 4, so we're gonna have to resolve it with a roll off. So 1, 2, or 3, the evil side wins. 4, 5, or 6, the good side wins. And the orc wins. So this guy is pushed back just like before. His friend is gonna move another inch to allow full movement. 5s. He does roll a 5, and 1 dwarf is cleaved from the line. Okay, the dwarves are suffering casualties. Every casualty the dwarfs suffer works against them. Okay, so choosing the best die when having multiple attacks for the dwarf is 6. Even if the orc uses a might point, which he's only left 1 might, he can't do it. Okay, so the dwarf captain would win the fight. And let's see what he does. Now, in order to wound... Okay, so he rolls a 1. But because of the Moria special rule, Wealth of Moria, he gets to re-roll that. And nope, not even with the might. Now, he has 1 might point. But even with that, it's only a 3. He needed 5s. So no wounding the orc leader. Both orc captain and dwarf captain are alive. Thank you very much for joining me. This has been a homebrew Middle-earth themed battle report. I'll see you in the future with more of these games, more experiments, and more things going on.